I'm Kitty. It was a Saturday morning in early October, and I was in the garden of my beloved property, carefully planting lavender along the stone path I'd painstakingly built. The sound of crunching tires on the freshly laid gravel driveway interrupted my peaceful task. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my knees, and watched as my father's sleek black BMW rolled to a stop in front of what I'd named Rosewood Manor. He got out slowly and just stood there. I watched his face transform in a way I'd never seen before. His mouth fell slightly open, and his eyes roamed from the restored wraparound porch with its elegant iron railings and hanging baskets of colorful blooms, up to the newly painted facade, across to the renovated stable that I'd turned into a charming event venue, and then out to the well-manicured grounds, the flower-filled meadows, the brick-lined garden walls, and the gravel paths bordered by wildflowers. He stood there for ages, silent. I let him take it all in. I didn't move towards him. I didn't wave. I just watched as he beheld the fruits of my labor. Finally, he walked towards me. He was smiling, but it was an uncertain smile, nothing like the broad, proud smile he'd given my brother, Leo, on that fateful day. "Kitty," he said, looking back at the house as if he couldn't tear his eyes away, This is extraordinary." I simply replied, "Thank you," keeping my voice steady. He then started a slow tour of the property, asking about the renovation, the stable conversion, and the garden design. I answered calmly and factually, like a host showing a guest around. And then, he dropped the bombshell. He said he'd been talking to Leo. Apparently, Leo had overspent in his fancy penthouse in Miami and some of his high-risk investments had gone south. The family thought it would be a good idea for Leo to come down to the countryside for a bit, maybe take over the management of Rosewood Manor. "You've done the hard work, Kitty," he said, smiling as if he was sharing great news. "Now Leo can step in. You can go back to your job in Chicago." He told me I had 3 days to think about it, and that Leo would be ready to move in the following weekend. I looked at him for a long time. Then, a real smile spread across my face. I'd been waiting, without even realizing it, for this moment. "Dad, you should know something before you finish that thought," I said. I led him to the side porch, opened my laptop on the outdoor table, and showed him the business registration for Rosewood Manor events and retreats, filed 18 months ago. I showed him the contract I'd signed with a corporate event planning company that had booked the stable for 15 events the next year. I presented the financial figures, the income from the first full season of weekend getaways, the projected earnings for the next year, and the recent appraisal value of the property. The numbers made him fall silent. I then told him the final piece. 6 months ago, a lifestyle magazine had featured Rosewood Manor. A well-known hospitality chain had approached me after seeing the article. We were in the final stages of a franchise agreement that would put Rosewood Manor on the map as a top destination in the South. My lawyer had vetted the contract, and my accountant had reviewed the projections. Everything was set in motion. My father sat down in a chair without an invitation. He stared out at the property for a while, then looked at me and said softly, "I didn't think you'd achieve all this." I replied just as quietly, "I know you didn't." And that was that. Let me rewind. I grew up in a wealthy family in Illinois. My father was a successful businessman, strict and driven, always focused on status and wealth. He expected me to follow the traditional path of getting married young and living a life of luxury, but I had different dreams. My mother was more passive, always going along with my father's decisions and rarely standing up for me. And then there was Leo, my younger brother, the golden child, always getting the best of everything. When I was 28, we were gathered in the living room of our family mansion. My father handed Leo the keys to a high-end penthouse in Miami with ocean views and every luxury imaginable. He clapped Leo on the back like he was the greatest achiever, and laughed that booming laugh that used to comfort me as a child, but now it made me sick to my stomach. Then he turned to me. Still smiling, he slid a single, rusty key across the table and said, "There's an old estate down in the countryside. It's yours. He said it with such dismissiveness, as if he was giving me a worthless trinket. My mother didn't even glance up from her newspaper, and Leo sneered at his phone. I just stood there, holding the key, feeling the weight of his dismissal. The next weekend, I drove down to the estate alone. What I found was a far cry from property. It was a dilapidated mess. The porch was leaning to one side, as if about to collapse. Several windows were shattered, and the roof looked like it could cave in at any moment. The inside was filled with cobwebs, and the plumbing was in shambles. The stables were half gone, with one wall having crumbled into the overgrown fields. I knew my father had seen this place. He knew exactly what he was doing. It wasn't a mistake, it was a statement. I sat in my car for almost half an hour, looking at the run-down building, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to call him in tears. I wasn't going to sell it for a pittance. And I definitely wasn't going to let him think he was right about me. I got out of the car, walked up the creaking porch steps, and pushed open the warped front door. I said out loud to nobody, "Okay, let's do this." What my father didn't know was that I had spent the past 5 years working as a project manager for a large construction firm in Chicago. I knew contractors, I knew building codes, and I knew how to manage a budget and a timeline. He thought he'd given me a hopeless wreck that would break me, but he actually handed me an opportunity. The first 3 months were incredibly tough. I was making the long drive every weekend, sleeping on an air mattress in the one room that didn't leak, and eating cheap takeout. I poured every dollar of my savings into foundation repairs and a new roof. My friend Lily, who I'd known since high school, came down twice to bring me coffee and talk me out of giving up when a contractor disappeared in the middle of the job. There were nights when I sat on the sagging porch in the dark, questioning if I'd made the right decision. But I soon discovered the good bones of the estate. Under all the decay and neglect, there was beautiful hardwood flooring, hand-carved wooden beams in the hall, and a fireplace made of hand-quarried stone that took my breath away when I first cleaned it. This place wasn't worthless, it just needed someone to care. By the 8th month, the main structure was stable. By the 14th month, I'd renovated 4 bedrooms, rebuilt the kitchen from the ground up, installed a modern heating system, and replaced all the windows. By the 18th month, Rosewood Manor had become a sight to behold. People would slow down their cars as they drove by on the country road, looking at the beautiful estate with envy. And that's when my father decided to pay his unannounced visit. 3 days after our conversation, on the morning he said Leo would arrive with a moving truck, I was sitting on my porch sipping coffee, watching the sunrise over my fields, when I got a text from my father. It simply said, "Leo isn't coming. This is yours." I'm sorry. I read it once, then turned my phone face down on the table and listened to the birds singing in the lavender bushes for a while. The lesson from my story is that those who underestimate you aren't paying close attention. That broken thing they give you because they don't believe in you can actually be the very thing that builds you. My father gave me a crumbling estate because he didn't take me seriously, but what he really gave me was a place where I could build without anyone's expectations holding me back. Rosewood Manor is completely mine. Leo is still trying to get his life back on track, and I still plant lavender every Saturday morning, but now I do it in a garden that belongs to a woman who was never the second best. He just didn't look closely enough to see it. If my story has inspired you, hit that subscribe button now because every week, we share real stories of women who were counted out but came back stronger than anyone thought possible. You don't want to miss what's coming next.